Namo Adidapa. Thank you for joining me for our daily practice check-in. Listen, listen, listen. This beautiful sound calls us back to our true home. The second mindfulness training. Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I vow to cultivate loving kindness and learn ways to work for the well-being of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I will practice generosity by sharing my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in real need. I'm determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. I will respect the property of others, but I will prevent others from profiting from human suffering or the suffering of other species on earth. For our Dharma lesson, we've been reading Ajahn Munindo's book, Unexpected Freedom. Today we're reading a section called Identifying with Pleasure and Pain. In his own lifetime, the Buddha experienced the limitation of being identified with and caught up in his sense impressions. The traditional story is that he spent the first part of his life cultivating pleasure in every way possible. Then around the age of 29, he encountered old age, sickness, and death, and these really unsettled him, and he fell into despair. Having been caught up during his early years in defining himself in terms of pleasurable experience, he went to the other extreme and became an ascetic. He found a new identity by defining himself in terms of painful feelings to see how much pain he could put up with. He embraced the popular religious view of the time that self-mortification would purify and liberate you. These sorts of ideas or of attitudes are not unusual even today. People try to get as much pleasure as possible from sensory experience in order to define themselves. How pleasant can I make my house? How much pleasure can I get out of my relationship or the environment in which I live in? I'll have nice fragrant smells in the bathroom and agreeable sensations, textures, and experiences in my life. This attitude is based on a perfectly natural and understandable preference for pleasure, and to varying extents, we've all experienced it. But it can be taken to an extreme whereby if we are not feeling pleasure, then we feel like we're failing. We all know on some level that pleasure comes and goes. If we maintain an awareness of this, then whenever we have a pleasant experience, we simply know that the experience is agreeable. We do not become lost in or cling to the pleasure of that experience. For instance, in the last few weeks, the weather here has been very agreeable indeed. As summer draws to a close and autumn arrives, living here in Northumberland can feel quite wonderful. The fragrances of the countryside, the mellow colors of the late summer evenings, the harvest, the blue sky, the birds, and the fruit are glorious. And with such nice people around and friendly visitors to the monastery, one can experience a comfortable, pleasant feeling of well-being. If there is presence of mind in the moment, however, then when there is this good feeling, there's also a knowingness, an awareness of the pleasure in experience. And this knowingness doesn't detract from the pleasure. Just as we can define ourselves in terms of pleasure, we can also do so through pain, with disagreeable physical or emotional sensations. For the Buddha to be identifying himself with pleasurable sensations hadn't liberated him. So he thought that identifying himself with pain might do the job. He became an ascetic. His self-mortification consisted in fasting, not drinking, and even in not breathing for sustained periods of time, as well as other forms of asceticism that increase the sense of physical frustration. Most of us don't attempt the extremes of asceticism to which the Buddha to be subjected himself, but we do much the same when we allow ourselves to become lost in depression or anger. I meet many people who for years have been dwelling in anger. The resentment is painful to see. These people may say they want to let go of their anger, but it is sometimes quite clear that they have a commitment to dwelling on it. They find a sense of security in defining themselves as unhappy or angry. At least some sense of safety with the familiar can be found in it. We can even get addicted to feeling afraid if it gives us the sense of being somebody. Without any other perceivable way of establishing ourselves in a feeling of safety, we are unable to let go. In the absence of informed awareness, when we encounter pleasure, we tend to define ourselves in terms of the pleasant feelings that arise. We become addicted simply to being our feelings. Not having a bad feeling makes us feel like we're somebody. Not feeling anything can appear very threatening. The Buddha to be's own investigation into his relationship with his feelings eventually showed him that indulging in painful feeling took him to the same place as his years of indulging in pleasurable feelings, unhappiness. He realized this wasn't a way to liberation either. Instead, he discovered a middle way between a life identified with pleasure and one identified with pain, which involved this quality of awareness he called right mindfulness, regarding all of experience with a presence of mind that meant that he wasn't deterred from investigating experiences, mental, physical, emotional, subtle, coarse, or anything else. On this middle way, we are encouraged to cultivate mindfulness so that we don't misperceive things. When pleasure comes along, there is knowingness. This is pleasure. We don't get lost in that pleasure. When there's pain and misery or disappointment and a sense of failure, or we are visited by fear or anxiety, we feel it, but we don't identify with it. In the short term, we may wish to escape from the reality of that pain, feeling perhaps that we cannot bear it, that we don't like it, we don't want it, we don't deserve it. Yet the Buddha teaches us to experience the reality of that pain out of compassion for our long-term well-being. We are not diminished by the experience of that pain. May all beings be well. May all beings be happy. May all beings be at peace. Namo Adida Phat. Thanks so much for joining me today.